You know what's funny about time? The further you get from it, the clearer certain things become. People ask me about the streak. They ask me about WrestleMania, about the championships, about the entrance. And I understand why they ask. Those things mattered. They still do. But honestly, that's never the first thing that comes to my mind when I sit down and think about 30 years in that ring. The first thing I see is faces, specific faces, men who stood on the other side of those ropes and made me earn every single thing I ever had. These are the 5 names that come to me faster than anything else. The first man I want to talk about is Mick Foley. When I first got to know Mick, I didn't know what to make of him. He didn't look like a superstar. He didn't carry himself the way you'd expect. He walked into a room and you'd think, this guy, this is who they're putting across from me. And I say that with every ounce of respect I have in my body. Because what I learned very quickly is that nothing about Mick Foley was what it appeared to be on the surface. The critics never stopped. His whole career, people said he was too soft, too theatrical, too dependent on gimmicks. They said he couldn't work a technical match. They said he was taking shortcuts. What they didn't see was what happened in that locker room after a match. What Mick's body looked like, what he had actually given night after night, just to make the audience feel something real. He absorbed punishment that would have ended other men's careers without a second thought. I remember Hell in a Cell, King of the Ring, 1998 Pittsburgh. The building was loud before that match even started. And then Mick went off that cage roof. I was standing there and I remember thinking, get up, just get up. And he did. That's the part nobody who wasn't there understands. He got up, not because the script said so, because that is who Mick Foley is. His presence changed the energy around every locker room he entered. When Mick was on the card, everyone else raised their effort. Not because they were competing with him, but because he made you feel embarrassed to give anything less than everything. When I think about Mick Foley today, I think about fearlessness, the kind that costs you something every single time. When I first worked with Shawn, I will be honest with you, he was not easy. He had an ego that filled whatever room he walked into before he even said a word. At first, I thought I understood him. I thought I had him figured out. I was wrong. What people outside this business never saw was what Shawn was carrying when he came back in 2002, 4 years away. A back injury that should have been a career-ending sentence. And he came back carrying the weight of having to prove not to management, not to the fans, but to himself that he was still capable of being who he believed he was. That kind of pressure does something to a man. Either it breaks him or it sharpens him. Shawn Michaels was the sharpest man I ever stood across from. I remember WrestleMania XXV, Houston. We didn't say much to each other in the back before we walked out. We didn't need to. We looked at each other and there was an understanding between us. We are going to tell a story tonight that people will carry with them. That wasn't arrogance. That was 2 men who had spent years learning how to read a crowd, read a moment, read each other. Shawn had a gift I have never seen duplicated. He could take absolute chaos in a match, a missed spot, a crowd go pleasant quiet, a moment falling apart, and turn it into something that looked intentional. He didn't react. He redirected every single time. When I think about Shawn Michaels, I think about brilliance, the kind that makes everything look planned, even when nothing was. On paper, our relationship was built on fiction. Brothers born from fire and tragedy, that's the story WWE told the world. And it worked. It worked in ways that surprised a lot of people, including us. But what I want to talk about has nothing to do with storylines or scripted confrontations or the mythology we perform for 20,000 people at a time. It has to do with what Glenn Jacobs was to me when the cameras were off and the arena was empty and there was nothing left to perform. When Glenn first debuted as Kane in 1997, the dynamic was clear to everyone watching. His entire existence as a character was defined in relation to mine. Everything about Kane, the size, the silence, the darkness, was constructed as a mirror image of the Undertaker. The world expects that kind of dynamic to breed resentment. If you spend years being introduced as the shadow of another man's story, the natural human response is to push back against it, to resent the man whose shadow you're standing in. Most people would. I would have understood it completely if Glenn had. He never did. Not once. Not in all the years we worked together. What the audience never saw was how Glenn carried that weight internally. He was one of the most physically imposing men in this business, one of the most genuinely intelligent people I have ever been in a room with, and for a significant portion of his career, the narrative around him was always secondary, always in service of something larger. He accepted that without complaint, without politics, without the kind of quiet sabotage that lesser men use when they feel undervalued, he showed up, he did the work. He made every segment, every match, every interaction better than it had any right to be. And he did it with a consistency that I still find difficult to fully articulate. Inside that locker room, Glenn's influence operated below the surface. He never needed to command a room. He walked in, he prepared, he held himself to a standard that younger talent could observe and measure themselves against. When things got difficult, when morale was low, when the road had gone on too long, when the internal politics of a wrestling organization were doing what they always eventually do, Glenn was the person who kept his head level. He didn't dramatize, he didn't escalate, he steadied things simply by refusing to be unsteady himself. I remember a Raw in early 2001. We had lost a tag match that night, one that mattered to both of us in ways that went beyond the result. I was sitting in the back afterward, not wanting to talk, not wanting noise, not wanting anyone to try to make it better with words. Glenn didn't talk to me. He sat down nearby and he stayed. No speech, no reassurance, no attempt to fix what didn't need fixing, just needed time. He understood the difference. That is rarer than people realize. Most people feel silence because they are uncomfortable with it. Glenn was never uncomfortable with silence. He understood that sometimes the most generous thing one person can offer another is simply their presence, without condition or agenda. When I think about Kane today, I think about stability, the quiet, load-bearing kind that holds everything around it together without ever once asking to be noticed for doing so. Steve and I were not similar people, not even close. Our characters were built on completely different foundations. What I did in that ring was about atmosphere, about something slow and inevitable, about dread that built from the moment the lights went out. What Steve did was immediate, explosive, loud in a way that hit you before you had time to think about whether you were ready for it. We occupied entirely different corners of this business. And for a long time, I wasn't sure what we had to say to each other beyond what the script required. I was wrong about that. There was a period in the late 90s, the Attitude Era, people call it now, like it was a concept someone planned in a boardroom, where being in the same locker room as Steve Austin changed how I understood this profession. Not because he gave speeches, not because he pulled people aside and told them how to do their jobs. Steve Austin never did any of that. What he did was simpler and harder and more effective than anything a speech could accomplish. He had a standard, an internal standard that had nothing to do with recognition or instruction. It was just how he operated. He arrived before anyone expected him to. He stayed long after the building had emptied out. He had done the preparation, the conditioning, the homework before anyone thought to ask whether he had. And because he did it without making a production of it, without ever mentioning it, without looking around to see who was watching, it became the silent expectation for everyone in his orbit. I want to say something about his neck because I think it matters. Most people know Steve had a serious neck injury. What most people don't feel, and there's a difference between knowing something and feeling it, is what it takes to perform at that level, while your body is telling you every single day that the cost is higher than it should be. I had my own conversations with pain over 30 years. I know what it is to walk to that ring carrying something the crowd cannot see. Steve Austin did that, and he never once used it as a reason. Not in front of other talent, not in a way that gave anyone else permission to use their own limitations as an excuse. That discipline was its own kind of leadership. I remember a show in late 1996, building toward our Buried Alive match. Steve was on the card for something separate that night, but he was at the building hours before bell time. Nobody asked him to be there. No one required it. He was in the back, working, preparing, doing what he did, because that was simply who he was. And I watched younger talent in that building notice it. I watched them go quiet for a second, recalculate something internally, and then go back to their own preparation with a little more seriousness than they had walked in with. He didn't say a word to any of them. He didn't have to. His presence didn't set a ceiling. It removed one. The question in that locker room stopped being, what do I have to do, and became, what am I actually capable of? That shift, that quiet, permanent shift in how a group of people think about themselves, that is the rarest thing one person can do for the people around them. When I think about Steve Austin, I think about standard, a level so high and carried so quietly that it changed what everyone around him believed was possible. And the last man I truly loved the most was Edge. I want to be honest about this one because it's the one that still sits with me in a way the others don't. Edge was my enemy for years. That is not an exaggeration. The character he built, calculating, ruthless, willing to do anything to win, was designed to be everything the Undertaker stood against. And he was extraordinary at it. He made me look like I was fighting something I genuinely hated. He was that good. Outside that ring, Adam Copeland is one of the most generous people I have ever encountered in this business. That contrast between the character and the man is something not everyone manages to keep clean after long enough. Adam managed it his entire career. What most people don't know is what Adam carried in the years leading up to 2011. The neck, the surgeries, the conversations with doctors that he didn't share publicly. He kept performing at a level that demanded physical commitments he was not supposed to be making because he believed he owed it to the people who came to watch. That is not a business decision. That is sacrifice. That is a man choosing to spend himself completely. I remember WrestleMania 24, Orlando. Before we walked out, Adam looked at me in the back and said, "I want this to be a match I remember for the rest of my life." He said it quietly, the way you say something when you mean it without ornamentation. I didn't fully understand what he meant that night. I understand it now. When he was forced to retire in 2011, it did not feel right. It still doesn't. Some endings are deserved and some are simply what happens. That one never felt deserved. When I think about Edge today, I think about sacrifice, a man who gave everything to this business until the business took everything back. The older I get, the more I understand what actually disappears and what actually stays. The ratings disappear. The pay-per-view buy rates, the contract arguments, the creative disputes, the headlines, all of it fades. You stop being able to remember exactly which promo landed and which one didn't. The specific numbers blur. The noise. All the noise that felt so permanent and so urgent while you were inside it, it goes quiet. What stays is the people. What stays is the look on a man's face in the tunnel before the entrance music hits. What stays is the silence in a locker room after a match that cost both men something real. What stays is trust, not the word, but the actual thing, the kind built slowly over years of showing up and doing the work and being there when it mattered and when it didn't. That's why these 5 names mean something deeper to me than any championship ever could. Mick Foley brought fearlessness, the irreplaceable kind, the kind that costs you something every time you reach for it. Shawn Michaels brought brilliance, a mind that could turn chaos into art in real time. Glenn Jacobs brought stability, the quiet, load-bearing kind that holds everything around it without ever drawing attention to itself. Steve Austin brought standard a level of preparation and commitment that made everyone near him incapable of accepting less from themselves. And Adam Copeland brought sacrifice, complete, unconditional, and ultimately unreturnable. What made those years what they were was not talent. Every era of this business has talent. What made it different was trust. Real trust. The kind where you hand your body and your career and your reputation to another man in front of thousands of people, and you know without a word being said that he will take care of it. I started by telling you I don't think about the championships first. I meant that. The ring was never just a ring. It was a place where trust had to be earned one fall at a time, and these 5 men earned every bit of mine. If you could walk down that entrance ramp one more time, who would you want waiting for you on the other side?